What if I don't feel like?
You shall be carried out of this studio.
Wow.
Freshly pressed on Smooth 98.1.
Mike's up. Studio is live. Good morning, Lagos. Thank you very much for being a part of the show this morning. You're welcome to Freshly Pressed 98.1 for Friday, 20th of December, 2019. I'm Ayo Mairese.
And I am Valentine Ohu. Good morning.
Today we have joining us for analysis of the news stories, Folu Storms.
Good morning, Lagos.
Good to have you.
Yes, good
You
to
can
be
find
here.
Folu Storms at Folu Storms on Twitter. We also have Wade Ahimie here as well.
Good morning, Lagos. Compliments of the season.
And same to you. Wade is at Reink Niger on Twitter.
Ring Nigeria.
Reink Nigeria.
on Twitter. Thank you very much. All right, you can join us. You can join the conversation this morning through WhatsApp,
Yes.
Twitter, and
WhatsApp
YouTube.
number is 0809 444 That is the WhatsApp number 0809 444 Twitter is at Smooth981FM. The hashtag is freshly pressed 981.
All right, our first story here for Lou says 22 ex-governors are under probe on trial. This is coming in from the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Mr. Abubakar Malami, SAN. Please take us through this story where he details, perhaps in listing the achievements of his administration, the fact that they have been able to convict and in some cases jail ex-governors. Anti-graft war.
Indeed, very interesting. The minister, obviously talking to journalists, was talking about the fight against corruption, saying that the failure to address corruption inhibits sustainable long-term growth, which undermines national development. This we know, but what I think is interesting, because this regime has, or this administration has.
Did you say regime?
I did say regime, excuse me. But this administration has sort of pegged its tent to the tent pole, talking about their fight against corruption. They've been very vocal about it, but a lot of people, I think there's a feeling generally amongst Nigerians that perhaps it may be a one-sided fight, but of course that's what he's addressing, saying that it is total, comprehensive, and dispassionate, devoid of any political or ethnic sentiments or inclination. And what we can say is that the fact that there are about 22 governors that are either on trial or facing investigations over corruption allegations is both worrying and promising. Worrying on the one hand that obviously it's again a reminder that corruption is such a systemic problem for us, but it's promising because that we're talking about it, that there's certain actions being taken, I think is a good thing. Of course, the former governors that have been convicted, Orji Kalu of Abia State, Joshua Dari of Plateau State, Jolly Nyame, well, we can't forget good old Jolly that we spoke about a while ago, are currently serving jail terms for corruption. So when people say that, oh, nothing is ever done, it's not true. There are things that are done, but how satisfying is it for the general public? Of course, this story also makes me think of recent news that came out of Pakistan, where their former military ruler has actually been not just tried for treason, but sentenced to death as a result. And that's really drastic. I mean, even for Pakistan, that's historic. For Nigeria, I can't ever think that when we're going to get to a time where we'll even be able to mention the name of an ex-president in connection with treasonable charges.
We probably will get there because Pakistan is not the first country that it has happened. It's happened in South Korea also. And the irony of South Korea was it was the child of one of the leaders that actually prosecuted the people she called them uncles and so on. So as the next generation continues, the laws are clear. Treason is treason, whether you committed it when you were 10 or you committed it when you were 50. And the day the law decides to work or act, I'm sure we'll get those things done, except you're dead.
And it's that action that the Nigerian people are truly waiting for, and I certainly hope that we see a little bit more happening in that direction, especially when it comes to former governors who we know enjoy a certain level of immunity while they're in office, especially in a nation where people are a bit loath to point out bad behavior of their brothers in politics.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. I think it's also, like you mentioned, on the promising side, Nigerians want to see that it's not just a common man that is being convicted for anti-graft offences. They also want to see people, high-profile cases, being convicted.
MI from Akwaka says, I'm not impressed by the AGF's announcement. Investigations should be covert ops and intelligence should be properly managed. this media trial is why we have such abysmal charges to convict ratio, charge to convict ratio or
But-
conviction ratio, because you give people opportunities to cover their tracks.
But can we just clarify? There isn't a media trial because none of the 22 governors that are currently facing investigation have been mentioned or named.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we actually don't know, and I think that's a very, very good thing, and it's very notable. So again, this is not a media trial. He was being asked about a number of things, especially because his predecessor was arrived from to Nigeria from Dubai and was immediately arrested. So it was in line with that conversation. So he's saying, listen, there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that we're not making public. So I think we should give them that little bit of credit.
That's
Thank
right.
you. Now, talking about the predecessor, we'll be looking at that in the course of this conversation, as we have a headline on that. We'll take that in a moment. But before then, Wadi, I've received requests to dethrone Emir Sanusi, says the governor of Kano State, Abdullahi Ganduje. Now we've had, it's almost like a Friday tonic, where we talk about the drama going on in Kano State between the Emir of Kano, which was at one time the only first class Emir in the state. Now the governor has
There are
created,
five- there are
yes,
five-
there are
there are
now
five
five
first
of them.
class
Following
emirs.
Oyo States there.
Yeah, and that hasn't seemed to be the end of the situation. We've now had him saying that some civil society organizations have come, and I think it's important. I want to mention the name of the head of this civil society
His
organization.
name is Comrade Ibrahim Ali.
Yes, that they've come out to say, despite the advice from the Kano elders, they've come out to say that he should actually be dethroned for his unconstitutional behavior.
When the first thing my first remark when I saw this is, this country is a joke, and pardon me for that, but the truth of the matter is we have civil society organizations calling for better Nigeria, and we have some people talking about the fight between Ganduje and the Emir of Kano. How does that affect the populace of Kano, where some people decide that? And why is it at this point in time that these 35 civil societies, they didn't see all the things that went through before now, the court cases and all of a sudden, because they've created new emirates, and all of them are screaming that they should dethrone the emir.
Yeah.
Why is it? Because it's vocal. Let's in we just looked at the issues relating to Pakistan, and as we said, when you do some things, you forget that you also would leave power, and those things can always come back to haunt you. You've gotten the state assembly to pass the law. The law has been passed. You've done what you need to do, and then what you need to do now is make sure that the development of Kano continues in line with all the first-class emirates that have been created and the emirs that are available. If you dethrone him, that's another 3-6 months of unrest in Kano, or possible unrest in Kano. Why? Because you want to fulfill your, in quote, your personal objective, or you think you want to fulfill a personal objective. And that's the way I see this story. Ganduje should face more economic issues pertaining to the state of Kano, improve on the lots of the citizens of Kano, make the economy better, and you've created the Emirates, let them work and let them make the people, serve the people, and make the place better.
But really, what I'm curious to know is what he stands to gain by removing Sanusi.
Well, I mean, arguably, the Emir Sanusi has always been a very vocal person, and he's been someone that's been a thorn in the side of anyone who perhaps is not doing their job, who's not towing the line. So I think it would be quieting a very loud, very powerful dissenting voice. And I think if you are trying to conduct the business of quote unquote ruling, because it seems to be what governors in certain states are doing. They're not governing the people, they're not serving the people, they're trying to rule. And if you are upset with someone who's affecting the way that you can rule unhindered, then you're going to get rid of that person. And the emir is a very powerful person. He was, before he even took up the throne. He already was in the political space, and we saw the sort of problems that caused when he himself was blowing the whistle and saying, well, money's missing here, this is happening here, we can never forget that. And he was heavily chastised for it. A lot of people sitting in power at the time also very tired of his very powerful, very loud dissenting voice, and we're seeing the same thing happening again in Kano.
All right, thank you very much. Fuller, I'll stay with you for the next one. This has been a topic of conversation since the news broke that the National Assembly plans to spend 37 billion Nigerian naira on renovating its premises. Members are adamant, apparently, and they've now even, probably to justify or to make it a bit, friendlier. They've approved 22 billion naira for the federal roads maintenance agencies, road repairs across the country. Please take us through the story.
Well, good people of Lagos, if you haven't read this story, it is from the Punch newspaper. I do advise that you go read it up. And when we talk about, yes, the National Assembly has approved 22.89 billion naira for federal roads maintenance agencies capital expenditure in the 2020 budget. Now, I think that when you place that side by side with the 37 billion that they've allocated for the repair of the complex, that's probably what's causing a lot of Nigerians to kick up in arms and say, well, that's a lot of money to be spent renovating an edifice. Now, in the defense of the governor, I said the governor, in the defense of the National Assembly, they have said, listen, the complex is a complete mess. This is one of the offices or the spaces where some of the highest officers in the land are operating. They have to hold hand fans, central air conditioning isn't working, bathrooms are not in a good usable state. And I think that it is important. Let's not act as though it's not important to make sure that our offices and the offices representing the federality of Nigeria are in a good state. But the reality is there not a piecemeal way in which this could be done? Can we see the detailed breakdown of this budget? It doesn't make sense that more money is put towards a building, an office building, than is being put towards the maintenance of roads. There's no
36 states in
way
Nigeria.
that people are going to be happy with that. It just doesn't work out. If perhaps they'd offered us a solution and said, you know what, we're first going to fix our air conditioning. That's what we'll do for this quarter. Then the next quarter, this is what we'll do. That makes more sense. When we as private individuals decide to renovate our homes or decide to renovate our spaces, we do it in bits and pieces. We start allocating our resources and say, well, it's priority for my family to feed, but it's nice to have the house looking nice. So let's put more money towards people being able to feed. And infrastructure is such a huge deal in Nigeria. And as we're going to see later on, we're now looking at touching possibly our pensions to help develop roads. When you're allocating this much money to develop your edifices, it doesn't make sense. And as much as the reps are saying people are being unnecessarily critical, I don't think it's unnecessarily critical of this situation.
Thank you very much. Very well said. But what do you want to say something?
Well, for me, this just goes to show you the culture of poor maintenance in Nigeria.
Yes.
And which is why you are thinking of spending 30
This
billion
amount now
to renovate the building. How can government offices, you go to a government infrastructure and everything is in chaos. And it's because on a yearly basis,
So
money
no
is
continuous
the
Yes.
things that you're supposed to do in terms of
Maintenance, yes.
little changes here and there.
It's
little,
not done.
Yeah, it's never done.
It's
Thank you.
not done.
Sorry about it. Thank you for pointing out that
Yes.
annually.
Yes, because
we-
money is allocated
Yes,
for
so
these
money is
things.
allocated annually
Yeah.
for repairs.
Yes.
Why are we not investigating where the money has gone to? Why are we spending 37 billion naira at once to fix something that should have been a continuous, renovation process?
It's a fantastic question, Ayo. But the issue now is, are you first going to investigate what happened to the money when you cannot use the space as an office? And that's the challenge you face.
But also, it just goes to show that unfortunately, our lawmakers are clearly not people who are able to deal with budgets properly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we're talking money, so I'll stick with you for this next story, as it links to, it really raises a big question for me in terms of tax. Like, what's our tax used for? If New Telegraph is reporting that the federal government and governors are targeting 2 trillion naira pension funds. Pension funds for road and power projects.
This story is taken from the New Telegraph, and it tells us that the National Economic Council are considering the investment of 2 trillion naira, the contributory pension funds, in the development of infrastructure that includes roads, rail, and power. Now, Val, Ayo, this is not the first one. This is not the first, second, or third time that we're hearing the government eyeing our pension funds. The pension has been sitting pretty. It looks good. There's a lot of money there, and it looks good because, well, people are investing their everyday blood, sweat, and tears into this pension fund, and they're saying, well, according to the current laws, in fact, the Pension Reform Act, that it does provide for the possibility of administrating these funds in a way that it can be used to develop infrastructure, and I think there's a percentage as well of that they want to use The real issue here, the real question is, how do we ensure that these funds are going to be used judiciously? How comfortable is the average Nigerian with the idea that the federal government can reach into their pensions, their life savings? This is long term. This is my retirement money, and use that judiciously and actually pay back the pension fund administrators appropriately. There's a huge trust issue in our nation, and you cannot blame the people for this. We see horrible pictures and videos and stories each day of old age pensioners, people who are outside waiting for their own pension. What happened to their pension? So why should we allow you to touch ours? It is not a comfortable space. I can't imagine the Nigerian people ever being entirely happy with this. If they decide to push it forward, I pity whichever administration decides to go forward with this, because it will really cost them political points. I personally am not happy with it. To me, it's the equivalent of somebody from the federal government coming to say, "Oh, Fodu, please, this is your savings account. We just want to borrow money. We'll give you back." Is in no, sir. No, that's my retirement money. So no.
It's instructive that you talked about trust and the Nigerian people and the Nigerian government, because yesterday we talked extensively on this, because we had another story with regards to saying, okay, once the government says we want to spend ABC amount of money on this, people are like, no, they're going to steal, they're going to do this. There's hardly that sense of trust, from the Nigerian man. That's very worrying.
Yes, it
Well,
is.
Prince says, so he sent a message that kind of justifies this. He says 75% of our pension funds are already with government through bonds and others, federal government, through other federal government financial instruments. The law allows them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, so government-backed bonds. Yes, we understand that.
Bengus says, what exactly is a one-sided fight against corruption? So far, the three convicted former governors are APC members, the same way we made noise about media trial of those former governors until they were eventually convicted. The fact that the press is reporting corruption cases does not make it a media trial. Every Nigerian who means well for this country should support the anti-corruption fight of this administration.
And Yinka says, strange how 35 civil liberty organizations are asking for the king in the north to be dethroned over disrespecting constituted authority. Is it safe to say that this comrade Ibrahim Ali did not watch the Gandola video? Why they're not asking for Ganduje himself to be impeached? Well, we're not surprised, since his in-law is also a former constituted authority now. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. We move on to our next story. Court invasion. Senate committee gives Attorney General of the Federation, SSS, others 24 hours to submit testimonies. From Premium Times, when you hear this headline, I don't think we even need to tell you the actors in this headline when it comes to Shore. Today is exactly 2 weeks when he was arrested in court. It happened on the 6th of December. And number one, some people are wondering why it's taking so long. We're still in the stages of investigation, summons. People expecting that action should have been taken, expedited. It's something that it caused not just local or national interest, but also international interest, with many calling for the sacking of the SSS Director General Yusuf Bichi. What do you have to say about this, Wade?
It's strange because it took them a week and so much clamor from the public to actually start to put this investigation together. But over the period, all the people who have been asked to come and see have either not been available. So what they've asked now is, okay, send us a summary of your statements so that we can do that review, and then we can ask the questions, which I think is fair. And the deadline since they started at the beginning of the week, the deadlines for all these things to come in is today, so that they can maybe over the weekend look through it, and then after Christmas, or
So
maybe
that's
on
3
Monday.
weeks.
Well,
And then we'll talk about New Year. So 4 weeks.
we also need to remember that yes, we've seen quite a number of videos of this across different medias, but we also remember that there is a process that must be followed, and if they're following that due process, then they should go ahead and follow it. The only thing is, for me, is the time it took to actually act in terms of calling for this investigation.
I have to call out something. You are talking about due process.
Yes.
Please, what due process was followed when they arrested him after he had been, granted bail by the court? Because we cannot talk about due process now when due process was not initially folled. I don't understand.
You're breaking the law on one side doesn't mean you should break the law on the second side, and that's the reality of what we face. It has happened. It's unfortunate. The Senate did not act on time to investigate it. but they've actually started and they're going through that process. So we must give them time to come up with their findings and their conclusions. And so let's give them that benefit of the doubt. It might be on Monday that they will come and they will have a sitting and they will have the hearing and then we'll give you a report the next day. But let's give them that. And at least they're doing something after so much public cry.
All right. Thank you.
We have messages. WhatsApp 0809 440 is the number. D says, has it been brought up that education budget is 48 billion naira? Renovation of National Assembly complex is 37 billion.
Priorities.
I know.
We have from Dami, as it stands now, 70% of your pension funds actually sit with the federal government through bonds and other government securities. I think there's a misunderstanding the government has.
All right. And Shagun says current pensioners are still waiting for their pensions, which are supposedly safe. Imagine waiting for pensions when they're being used. Ken.
Just as one of your listeners said, when you're in power, don't forget you leave power one day. The Emir used his power as CBN governor to make the banks great. From then till date, the banks are doing great, sacking a lot of people. He deserves what he deserves what he's getting.
Can I just say something very quickly with regards to the pension funds and yes, maybe with government bonds back, don't forget that, but that's still actively bringing in money. These are investment instruments, so people, the average Nigerian or whoever wants to buy bonds, I'm buying it with money, so it's sort of compounded. I mean, I'm not a financial person, so excuse me, but that's a real investment. If you're taking my money and you're putting it in a road, is very different.
Let me just say something about
Please,
that.
please do.
And it's important that we say this.
We don't have lights. Go ahead.
Investments in infrastructure will create the enabling environment for social activities to go on
In the long term.
in the long term.
Yes.
Yes, and that's why you must invest in them.
Yes.
And it creates new opportunities. It opens up new places, so your economic growth should improve.
Right.
And that's the issue here for me is the issue of trust.
Yes.
If they take these monies and they say they're building a 10-kilometer road, are they building a 10-kilometer road that's going to last us for the next 20 years?
So have they cut the grass?
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. So, but investing it in infrastructure, believe me, it's a bond. And like I said earlier, when we were talking of the biggest guarantor of monies in any country is the government. So they borrow so much, but as long as they put it into the right places, your social and economic system should work better. And that's the issue here is the issue of trust.
Yes.
Like some people have said, 70% of your bond. The good thing about pension today is it doesn't sit directly with the government.
Yes.
It sits with the pension funds who would
The
look at their
administrators,
portfolios and manage it for you.
What worries me is just to also know in the space of things and how we're talking about this and sounds dandy and all, but Kenya is funding 85% of their budget with their own money. They're not borrowing any extra funds or taking from money.
See, let's look at our reality. We're broke. That's the Nigerian reality.
Yeah.
Well, let me come to you with this story happening in Akwa Ibom. The same guy who, Wade, the guy who posted a Facebook post made public criticism of the governor, Udom Emmanuel, Akwa Ibom State Governor. Actually, he has been granted bail, the bank official that was remanded in prison for allegedly publishing damaging and annoying articles on Facebook.
All right, so that's from the Premium Times. Yes, that is correct. So this this gentleman, Michael Itok, he's 21, has been, first of all, he was sort of, I feel, abducted. He was sort of held for 48 days before he was remanded to prison for 23 days. So please, let's just bear that in mind. So a couple of things to look at. On the one hand, we must remember that if you are going to write about anyone, whether they are a sitting governor, whether they're just a person you met on the road, you've got to be able to prove to a certain extent any statements that you're making against that person, especially where there's issues of morality, there's issues of legality in their behavior. You cannot just wake up and because you don't like someone or because you think or you heard a story from somewhere that you cannot substantiate that it's like this man is like this. Actually, if you check, maybe, and this young man, because when also you see his age at age 21, who says that he used to work as a steward for Governor Udom, even though we're not given again, and I can't find anywhere on the internet the text of what he wrote, which on the one hand could be good or it could be bad, because it means that the person who is alleging that he's being defamed or being slandered, that propaganda isn't carrying out into the wider world. But I do know that young people on social media do tend to get a bit carried away. It's very easy to show up on someone's page and make any kind of statement that you want. You can be insultive, you can be abusive, and we've got to learn that there is repercussions for such actions. But what concerns me, on the other hand, is that this man was first picked up by the SSS and the state for 48 days before he was remanded to prison. And we mustn't allow this sort of thing to continue. I think as a people, yes, don't go out and just go on social media and say negative things about others, especially with no proof, with no ability to substantiate. But we need to move away from being a nation that allows people to be abducted, essentially, by state government.
Thank you very much.
Right, Chris says on a lighter note, let National Assembly give me 5 billion. I will do the renovation for them and give them change.
That's
What
it.
are they renovating? Thank you, Chris.
All right, send your messages to WhatsApp 0809 444 0981. Twitter is at Smooth981FM. The hashtag is freshly pressed 981.
We have this from Dami, who says, when the government invests in infrastructure, businesses thrive and the government is able to increase its taxes and payback. The PFAs will ensure transparency if the proper framework is implemented. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Well, welcome to you for the story. Guardian newspaper reports that the Akwa Ibom community doubts benefits of proposed nuclear energy plants. Those who are mulling this idea say it's one of the safest, energy sources. It will benefit the community, but they're kicking back against it. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it's probably the safest anywhere in the world today. It's probably the cleanest also. However, the things you need to put in place to ensure that these things work safely and provide you the quantum of energy that you require, which one nuclear plant can provide, that 10 thermal plants can't, is critical. And this is a country where we can't even deal with the issues of petrol tankers falling on the road and catching fire. And then we're talking about building in a nuclear power plant. That's one. Two, we saw what happened in Japan. They are still feeling the effects. This is like 10 years after, or how many years after. This community is really concerned because, and I am concerned also as a Nigerian, because even the basics in power, the natural gas that we can't use to flare our turbines, the hydro systems that the waters are never available, we can't manage that in terms of maintenance. How do we even do this? It's just another big elephant in the room that we're trying to put together and say, oh, Nigeria is now a nuclear power generator. You haven't taken the baby steps. You want to start running, and so that is what I see. And these guys have a huge reason to be scared, because if any of those plants should even start leaking, I'm not even sure we would know that the thing is leaking. People would have died from reactions before we even know that the nuclear plant is bad. In a country where we don't even have proper maintenance structure, how do you ensure that this? It's believe me, it's safest. It's the safest form of energy generation. It's cleanest as it is today. But the consequences for just the leakage is humongous, and we can't even deal with the basic things that we can manage, and we're talking about this.
I think this is a huge thing for us to consider, taking a look at ourselves as a people, because we are the ones that cut corners. It's not some imaginary, nameless, faceless individual in the sky. That tankers fall on the road is because there's a company that knows that they have tankers that they haven't maintained properly. There's a driver that knows that his brakes had failed and he refused to do anything about it. So, I mean, the way technology is moving, eventually we're probably going to have to start using nuclear energy one way or another, regardless of how we feel about it. But can we start building in ourselves a culture of following through, of doing our jobs? Just like Nigerians, I'm begging everybody, just do your job. Stop saying, oh, this person should have done it because it's bad, waiting concern. But no, it is your, because a little mistake, a little lack of attention, it costs lives. And we've seen it happen in our aviation industry. We've seen it happen on the streets of Lagos and all around Nigeria. We see it happen all the time. So this is really down to us. That's the government is doing what it can do in terms of planning, in terms of saying, well, this is where we need to move forward to, but it takes us to implement it. And if we refuse to take our responsibility seriously, then we're always going to be stuck in the dark ages.
I agree with you.
Whether anyone is looking or not, really.
Yeah, that's the reality.
Traffic lights.
Good example.
Let's touch on this very last story from the Guardian newspaper. Why we arrested detained Adoke after return from Dubai by Interpol. He's been accused as the Minister of Justice, Bello Mohammed Adoke. He's the former Minister, Attorney General and Minister of Justice. He's been accused of complicity in an alleged fraud in OPL 245, otherwise known as the famous Malabu oil deal. What are your thoughts on this, please?
Well, he was arrested. They've gone to court on this issue. He's gotten some form of discharge from the courts,
Yes.
and I guess the EFCC has, as usual, have new things that they need to present, and they need to ask him those questions. The critical point here is they asked Interpol to arrest him, but they did not provide all the details of whether the court hearings, the discharge, and everything to Interpol. And that for me is where the issue is. But the man is back, he's in the custody of Interpol. He will go to the FCC and sort himself out, and hopefully we'll come to the end of this Malabu deal.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Wadi, for your thoughts, and thank you for.
Thank you very much. You can find Follow Up Follow Storms on Twitter and Wadi at Ring Nigeria. Thank you for engaging with us this morning, Lagos. Please continue the conversation online on Twitter at Smooth981FM using the hashtag FreshlyPressed981. Next up is the Locker Room 981 with Tega.